People don't pay you to type. They pay you for your knowledge and, again, putting the right words on the paper. So if you can find a way to automate getting the right words on the paper, you're a better lawyer, right?
1, 2, 3, 4.
Welcome to the Automated Lawyer Podcast. I am one of your hosts, John Fritz, and I'm joined with my co-host, Dan Sherbush. Dan, what's going on this week?
Oh man, it's been an interesting week. I picked up a gigantic 49-inch curved panel monitor. It is the sight to behold. I feel like I'm in a cockpit of an airplane or something.
That's awesome.
It's pretty cool though. You're gonna have now I can have like 4 or 5 documents and web browsers side. It's pretty intense, but the equivalent of 2 27-inch monitors side by side. So I'm very pleased with it so far. But how about yourself?
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of the big monitors. I have 2 that are on hydraulic arms that I think they're 24s maybe, or they're in their 20s. It's nice, but then you have that gap in the middle though. So if there's no gap, that seamless screen, that's next level stuff.
Yeah.
I am doing great this week. I'm really excited about our topic for today. We're going to talk about some document automation stuff. You know that I have been a big fan of document automation from probably about 5 years now, and tried to build a legal tech product out of it, and basically did, but decided to just use it in-house as opposed to trying to sell it to other lawyers. But I'm a huge fan of all things automation, and especially documents.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think document automation to me is like one of those low-hanging fruit that, of all the things and all the tech things you can put in your practice as an attorney, like document automation is probably on the 80-20 principle is going to drive like a huge amount of value on the fulfillment operation side for a ton of firms. Now, especially like for process-driven firms like probate, estate planning, traffic tickets, some parts of family law, things like that, where you're filing the same kind of documents a lot, just the gains are pretty obvious. But really anywhere, I think it's pretty ridiculous what you can accomplish with some good document automation.
Yeah. I thought about this when I originally started my firm. I had multiple practice areas. I was doing personal injury work, I was doing estate planning, and then started doing probate throughout that time. And the document automation stuff, like you said, can really be applied to any practice area. I mean, people think like, oh, I do litigation, so it can't be applied there. Like, not true. I built a platform for car accidents where it would produce all of my pre-lit documents, almost all of them, through a 30-second automation. A 5-minute interview would produce everything. And then I was producing complaints. I was producing discovery requests, requests for admissions. Because, if you think about it, almost all these practice areas have a common thread, whether it's a practice area or a niche within a practice area, right? Car accidents versus nursing home cases versus whatever. So yeah, I completely agree with you that it's an absolute low-hanging fruit, and that if you're not doing it, then you're missing out big.
Yeah. I remember I used to do injury defense for a lot of insurance companies. And, it was very traditional practice. Like, discovery comes in, or we need to prepare some discovery. And as far as document generation would go, it would be like, well, let's look at the last case we did, pull those templates and manually swap out all the names.
For sure.
But that's how like everybody did it. Like we're in the world that we were in, at least that I knew. I mean, I think the plaintiff side was probably a little quicker to the document automation game than defense, perhaps unsurprisingly. But now, it's fun. Sometimes I think about like how I could do that same setup and literally translate what was hours of work into a single click in our current system, where you'd spit out the discovery, spit out the answer, spit out the various simple motions and things like that in a single click that would have taken hours to put together before. It's crazy. So the benefits of document automation are, in that sense, kind of self-evident for many firms, or I like to believe that they're self-evident. You're talking about probably one of the single largest pieces of efficiency gains that you can get on the fulfillment and operations side, especially, which is going to translate into cost savings. You just need less people hours to generate the same product. It's a huge part of what we do as attorneys is put the right words on paper, right? Like, yeah, we get paid for our advice, some practice areas more than others, but a lot of it is just putting the right words on paper. So if you can automate that system in any material way, it is just game changing.
Yeah. And going back to your point about the defense side, I have a 6-year defense litigation background as well. The key difference between introducing automation in our firms and introducing automation in a defense firm is, at least from my perspective, the defense firms are billing by the hour. They have no incentive whatsoever to reduce the amount of time, because that would just reduce the amount of billable time they would have, which would reduce revenue. I think that things will move, eventually will move. And they were starting to kind of dabble in that when I left about 6 years ago, moving to the flat fee kind of stuff per case. Like, here's $10,000 for this case, like get it done, or here's
Yeah.
$5,000 or whatever
Right.
it is, right?
Right.
Which would then completely incentivize them to switch to that sort of automation mode.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm 100% with you there. And I too, as I was leaving, saw some of that, those changes coming as well with the flat, especially from insurance companies, the flat fee defense rates. And I remember looking back thinking like, wow, that's nothing. How are we going to, how are we going to manage? But looking at it now with a modern perspective on the technology, that's a heck of a lot of money for what you're able to do if you can really automate the whole process. And it's pretty cool. So yeah, there's that element of driving cost savings. But another thing that I think a lot of people undervalue about document automation is the value of consistency and client service. So you're delivering the same experience for every client that comes through. They're getting the same letter with the same information, so you can refine and tweak. And if something's not working, you can say, all right, we can A/B test or just update our letter so that everybody's getting the same information. And you're saving time, so you're able to spend more time on working with the clients or answering their questions and stuff. There's a lot going on here that I think we can plumb, and a lot of value from this document automation kind of space.
I mean, when it comes to my journey, when it comes to document automation, where I started at, it was myself. I was a solo practitioner. I had no staff, and I'm sitting there working, doing whatever I can to bring new cases in, right? Because that's how you survive, right? And then I would get the cases. Eventually, you come up with a system that works. Okay, now cases are coming in. How am I going to work these cases up? And so you're going through the struggle of then working the cases up. I remember one day I was sitting there and I was doing documents. It was a probate case, right? I'm sitting there and I'm typing in the same name across like 5 documents, right? Where I'm entering information in one document and then I'm drafting the next one. Maybe it's an application to probate will, and maybe it's a small estate affidavit, right? I'm entering the same information over and over. It took me like half a day to prepare these documents, right? Manual entering this stuff. And I was like, there's no way I can survive. There is no way I can scale. I can barely keep up with my current caseload. Your options are either hire staff or use tech or a combination of both.
Yeah.
And so I got into the automation stuff and started working with the company. It used to be called Documate, and then now it's called Gavel. And both of us know the founder of that company. I started working with them and their systems and started, kind of building things. And then once I started, I could not stop. It's like, what else can I automate?
Yeah.
And it was awesome. And I still love building the automation systems and the platforms today. I mean, it's still because of what you get, right? You put the time in and, put all the time in up front, and then you just get this kind of almost perpetual, results that are just amazing, right? When it comes to all the stuff we talked about.
So let's talk for a minute about the different types of documents that can be automated. So like I try to automate pretty much any document that we generate. From our perspective, it starts at the very beginning. Our engagement agreements are automated, for example. What gets written in that agreement before it gets sent out for electronic signature is fully automated based on the boxes that we check on our intake questionnaire, the names that we put in, and so on. After that, we're seeing the automation of basic pleadings, like the filing of different probate documents. We still do some estate planning. So the generation of estate planning documents is all done by filling out questionnaires, and all that data is moving through those documents automatically. Every piece of correspondence that we send to the client, like every email that goes out or text message that goes out or a template letter that explains their duties as a PR or anything like that, all that stuff is automated, both in terms of what goes into it, but also through conditional logic, like which pieces of the document are relevant to that client. And so, a lot of people ask, like, oh, well, I run this kind of special litigation practice, so I don't use, no 2 documents are the same. And it's like, well, what about all this other stuff, like the correspondence that you send to the client and the onboarding sequence with the client and all that stuff? There's so many different ways to implement. What do you see in your practice as kind of the biggest areas that you're applying these systems?
Yeah, I mean, specifically for the probate, obviously we do all probate in my firm. And, I started out just the basic court documents, right? Creating a database of the court documents that you use. Just every time you use a new set of documents, just save it into a folder. But I started doing that. And then I started going to the actual websites and scraping all their documents from the websites. St. Louis County, St. Louis City, Jefferson
Mhm.
County, St. Charles County, scraping everything I could because they have all their own court document. And then you select, St. Charles County, and then it puts out all the specific documents for that county, right?
Right.
But I started out with the court documents and then went to letters. And then it's basically every single piece along the way. I don't think that there's a single document that we draft from scratch in any case that we do. There's always something. So we put our data in, the system generates it and puts the output. And I think some of our automations, depending on how it'll run up to 10 errors in a case, could be over 100 documents in a case.
Mm.
And they go into they're all really nicely named automatically. So I'm not changing names of documents and I'm putting them in a folder, or at least I'm not putting them in a folder. Somebody else is, one of my team members. And then it's time to send letters. You grab the letter, you pull it down. Maybe you change the date on it. Maybe you tweak it slightly, but the amount of time you're saving from having to type in the client's name and the address and all those kind of basic things, it's pretty amazing across the board.
Yeah.
I would push back on the people that say that their litigation practice or whatever practice they're doing, there's a common denominator in all of those documents they're creating, right? Whether it's just a pleading, the case header on the pleading, right? In your signature block, your opening paragraph and your closing paragraph. Start with something that automates, right? And then you can fill in the rest and make changes. And that's just, you're always going to save time on those documents.
Yeah. And you said something that I think is important to take home is that one huge advantage of document automation, especially for firms that are starting to add staff, is that no matter who clicks the button, you're going to get the same document, right? No matter who drafts the letter or the pleading or or whatever, you're going to have the same captions, the same formatting, the same paragraphs are going to be inserted. And there's not going to be any mistakes in, oh, I forgot to change the name for this thing here. It can help with getting people onboarded and trained a lot faster because the substance of what goes in documents is more a matter of helping them get familiar with it and less a matter of teaching them to draft everything from scratch. So there's just a scalability there where you can bring on new team members and get them into the system and pushing the buttons and sending the stuff out a lot more efficiently than you could if you're still going from raw drafting. I remember when I was learning to be an attorney, everything was drafted from scratch, which, from a learning perspective as an attorney there's some value there, but the amount of time, basics, 2-3 years into the practice, right? Because, so much of it was reinventing the wheel every time, which you just don't have to do when you're automating a lot of this stuff. It makes it so much easier to hand things off to paralegals and people who can help run the machine, so to speak.
Yeah. And I think that the scalability is a huge piece. You talked about the consistency and accuracy. And I think that's also just as important, especially when it comes to misspellings. I remember when I was an intern at a law firm and I was going through and putting in, people's names into, I was drafting a motion for summary judgment or something like that, right? And I'm putting on the signature block, the attorney's names, which should be fully automated, at this point in life, right? Where there should never be a question on being able to type attorney's names. But I spelled one of the attorney's names wrong, right? It was 2 R's or 2 A's or something. And I missed one of the letters, right? And I got chewed out so hard from this attorney about, this is basic stuff. And I was, and he was right. It was basic stuff, but basic stuff and I learned that lesson the hard way, and so from that, literally that point on, I'm so very particular about spellings and just accuracy on basic things that should not be, there should not be errors, right?
Yeah.
And automation really helps support that kind of obsessiveness of making sure that some things are very accurate.
Yeah, that absolutely. Accuracy is huge. And just freeing you and your team up to focus on the higher value thinking work that you're actually paid to do more than, I'm going to type up this couple of sentences here. It's people don't pay you to type. They pay you for your knowledge and, again, putting the right words on the paper. So if you can find a way to automate getting the right words on the paper, you're a better lawyer, right? If you can do it faster, you can deliver higher service at the end of the day. That's not the only thing that makes you a better attorney, obviously, but it is a piece of the puzzle. Let's talk about tools a little bit. So I know you mentioned Gavel. There's a lot of different things out there. And at this point, it seems like pretty much every platform has some level of document automation from the very basic all the way through extreme. Maybe let's kind of survey some of those things. So a lot of people, they're maybe using Clio or MyCase or Lawmatics or Locus as their practice management and may already be familiar with some basic levels of document automation because all those tools can do a little bit of that. generating merge fields, and Lawmatics, for example, can do a little conditional logic, depending on which document type you use, where stuff will come in and out depending on fields and properties and what things are set like in the system. I would consider that basic level document automation, but it also just a testament to how accessible and available this stuff is, because probably the tools you're already using have some level of document automation. And one thing that a lot of people don't know about is stuff like Word and Google Docs have excellent template systems in them for generating documents from a template. And Google even has, like, they call them variables now, where you can drop these little tokens in your documents and replace a word everywhere. We use very different systems, but if, the tools you're already using probably have a bunch of basic document automation built in. You can generate documents from template and really cut down on your workload on a lot of those simple things. So John, tell us a little bit about the advanced tools and tell us more about Gavel. How does it work? What are you actually doing in the platform to make it do this magic?
Yeah. And like I said, I'm a huge fan of Gavel and just their systems and the level of automation you're able to do. I think there's other companies out there, so it doesn't matter what company you're going to go with. I like the fact that you're able to, I never liked going into FileVine and clicking a button to automate that set of documents, right? I feel like that's too many clicks. Now you could reduce it to simply load it all into one kind of section, right? You click a button and it does all your stuff for you, right? But what I liked about Gavel is just data coming into the system. All of your data comes in, and then you basically just build an interview, right? So the interview is, you ask basically the questions. Each answer to the question has a little custom code snippet that you actually create yourself. Client first name, right, is the code for that one. You put client first name, you bring up your Word document or your PDF, you click on the little Word add-on from the company, and it brings it up. So you can add that little snippet in, and then you upload your document to the platform, and then you type in the client's first name, hit run, and it puts that on the first name throughout all the documents.
Yeah. And so it's clear for people who aren't super familiar with these systems, when John uses the term code, that's kind of don't let that scare you. Like, document.
Yeah, it's no code.
Yeah. I mean, Gavel's, like, when he says code, what that really means is it's just a couple of curly braces around the word on each side. Now, there is conditional logic in there that looks a little more like codish stuff, but the Word plugin programs it all for you. Like, you just, with little drop down buttons, you just click, oh, well, if marital status is married, then show this paragraph. And then you click insert, and it just fits the little code block in there, and you just put in the block of text that you want to be inserted. You just have to know how to click a few buttons on a little Word widget, and that's all it takes to program your document in a tool like Gavel. It's pretty awesome.
And I think the important part too is that your interview, right? You create this interview how you want it to read, and so that anybody in your team can very simply go through and enter the information in, right? And so you start out entering information in for that case, but then you're like, okay, well, how do I get my data from my CRM to zap over directly into my automation platform? And then that way you're not even filling out some of these major sections of this interview are already pre-filled with the case information, right? The client's information is already pre-filled. The decedent's information is already pre-filled. So you're adding some stuff that wouldn't make sense to automate because it's only, a one piece of data set, right?
Yeah.
But starting out with just a basic interview, and just, even if you had somebody manually typing in the information on your case in there each time, in producing, 10, 20, 30, 50 documents that are all specific to that case, I mean, the time saving is just unbelievable.
And I want to kind of emphasize the workflow that you just described. Like, for those of you who listened to our last episode where we were talking about Zapier, let's say you don't collect your data you don't want to collect your data through your document automation system. Maybe you want to collect it through your CRM, or you have a system that manages your leads. John talked about how he uses Pipedrive. We use Lawmatics. There are a whole bunch of them. You might be collecting a lot of the case data through that system during onboarding. And what's incredible is if you're sending a questionnaire form to the client, which at some point is kind of the gold standard to help collect a lot of that information, the data that ends up being pushed in might be stuff that you didn't even have to put in. It might have been stuff that your client put in. Now, in many cases, we have to have a little data validation because people will, type in addresses wrong, or they'll, capitalize every letter of their name or something like that. But if you get 80-20 principle, right? If you can get 80% of the value from the intake form that you fill out during the consult or from data supplemented by the client, like listing out the 12 errors. Well, maybe I got to fix their names because they, capitalized all the letters or something. But at the very least, I have all that information. And now we're able to push that directly into our drafting platform. Filling out these questionnaires can take, in some cases, minutes to generate that whole stack of documents. It can get really, really ridiculous. This is circling back to that stuff we talked about, efficiency gains and cost savings. You can see where that starts to stack up.
And along that point, I actually had for a probate case. So I had my paralegal for a probate case. This is about 2 years ago or a year ago, but I had her go through and manually pull documents from a library, right? Physically pull them and then actually type in the information manually, just like no automation, no document automation in a law firm, right? You're pulling old docs, you're refilling the information in and doing that, right? Over the life of this case, I think it was 8 hours of time it took her to do that. And we're talking about 4 or 5 errors, a full estate, right? I don't know if it's about 100 documents that it produces for that, or maybe it's about 80, but it was about 8 hours per case. And then you multiply that by the number of cases that you have, and just massive amounts of time. So let's talk a little quick about, Dan, your tech. And I know you're kind of constantly dabbling in new tech when it comes to everything. So what are you using for document automation right now? Where do you want to go, and what direction do you want to go, and why?
Yeah. So our document automation is kind of, if I could break it into categories, I'd say tier 1 of document automation is learning to leverage what you have, learning to leverage Word document automation, templates in Google Docs, templates in Clio, templates in Lawmatics, working from templates. Level 2, I think, is using these more advanced document automation platforms. Gavel, LawYaw, Knackly, all those a lot of them are legal focused.
Yeah.
And trying to, in many of them, what you're doing is you're either manually entering data and outputting a stack of documents, or you are, in the case of Gavel, you're pushing some data in, most of it, and then outputting a stack of documents. And then I would describe kind of like tier 3 document automation is where you have your own data source, like your case management system or some other system. In our case, we use Airtable as kind of our relational database, but you could use all kinds of stuff. SmartSuite is out there now. For people who are getting really extreme, there's tools like Zano, where you can build like a proper no-code database that any platform or any software application would be happy to have. And they're not that hard to build now. So we have our data stored in Airtable. The problem that I was solving for is we used Gavel, and we still do to some extent. Documents, when they come out of Gavel, as powerful as it is, they don't do anything after that. You have to save them to your Google Drive folder, and then you still have to manually decide what to do with them. Like, well, this is a letter to the client. Now we're going to send this for mailing, or we're going to do whatever it is. I wanted to take it a next step and say, all right, well, how can we actually generate the document and take action on it in the same automation or without ever having to touch it? And the only way to do that was to have your own data source and then use tools that could be automated within a workflow. So for Word documents, we use a tool called Documentero, which is on AppSumo deal right now for a ridiculously low amount of money for a lifetime deal. And basically it lets me output Word documents through a Zapier or Make automation, and I can pull all that data directly out of Airtable. So one of my favorite use cases is, and the example I give a lot is, let's say we have 5 errors in a case, and we need to send them a renunciation consent form in a probate case where we're asking the heir to renounce their right to serve as PR. We're asking them to nominate our client. We're asking them to waive the bond and allow for independent administration. So 4 things that are very important to the processing of a case, as you know. But I was finding that it was still a lot of steps in sending that out. So now what we do is we've got records for each heir in Airtable and a little button right next to it that says send a renunciation consent. And so when we click that button, it goes through a Zapier automation that generates the document from template instantly, populating in all the correct information. And then it does the next thing. It connects it to a paper mailing service. We use a tool called DocuPost, but there are a bunch of them, Click to Mail and all these other things. And it pushes the generated Word document file into the mailing system, instantly sends it out for paper mailing to that person. And at the same time, it also sends the same document to them via email and via text message. If they have a fax number, it also sends it to them via fax. So we're just kind of barraging them with this document saying, please sign this.
They're like, stop sending me this stuff.
It's kind of omni-channel outreach just to make sure we get in front of them. And all of that happens as part of one automation. The main takeaway is that we're generating the document and taking the relevant action on it. It's already in good shape to send as soon as it's generated through the power of document automation. So that's kind of where I see the pinnacle of document automation. I just don't know how it could get any better than that. So that's kind of what we're doing. We use different tools for PDFs and stuff like that, but that's the basics of it. That was kind of a long explanation to your question, but
Yeah, I mean, yeah, no, I love the next level, the mailing piece. And my disconnect is sometimes there's some custom tailoring. In that use case where you talked about, there's almost no custom tailoring. It's a form generated document. I have some clients that are like, yeah, we want this to be emailed only, or we want this to be, the clients want this via mailing. They don't want it via email. They want a hard copy, et cetera. I'm always worried about that fine tweaking before you press the button and there's that series of events. But at the end of the day, I think I'm just being super particular on that point, as opposed to the 80-20 principle of that 80% of clients are going to be, or 90% of clients are going to be fine with it, or even 95, but the way it's set up.
yeah.
I need to get over that kind of that particularity of control and just kind of let the system, kind of do its thing. And I will get there. It's just, I still want to control.
Yeah. The thing that's neat about it is once you control your own data source, you can filter for any of that stuff that you want. It's a very interesting point that you raise about that, because we actually tried to account for that in our intake questionnaire. One of the boxes that they can check if they want is I request paper mailing for everything. If they check that box, then they will always receive paper mail for every that gets generated, even if it's would normally have been sent through email. So when you control your own data source, you can add a field or a property that will check for that without that much difficulty. So that's just the power of some of the things we talked about before in our last episode or two, the power of having your own data source, but also having your own ability to either you or someone on your team or someone that you hire or work with to be able to build those customized automations. That's the only way to get that granular, to either know how to do it yourself or somebody on your team to do it, or to hire somebody. It's totally doable. That level of granularity in an automation is completely doable. So but it's a great call out, because there are times when you want to be able to make adjustments, and we use a different workflow for that. But
I think you're completely right, though, when it comes to the data source thing is huge, right? And once you get through the process of your tech stack, everybody ends at the same point, right? Because all you want to do is more and automate more. And then you get to a certain point where you have that ceiling, right? Where you can't control the data source. You can't control the fields you want to include. And so that's really important. But to your point on, I have to feel like, and I'm deadly up to a certain point when it comes to automations and Zapier and Make, right? There's always somebody out there that can be doing that work for you, right? And so I always feel that I need to do it, right? I'm like, well, I can do it. I can figure my way through it, right? And eventually get to where I want to be. But why am I not paying somebody to just come in and do that, right? I mean, my time should be, X amount an hour, but we use flat fees. So I think that X amount an hour is higher than an hour billable rate, right? I think that, you value your own time at X. You shouldn't be doing work less than what you shouldn't be doing, trying to wear every single hat, right?
Yeah.
It makes sense to send this stuff out. And I think that having somebody come in to help automate that stuff for you, telling them what you want, is kind of where I'm at now. I've used people in the past. Kelsey is awesome, through the Maximum Lawyer. He was great. But, I'm going to need somebody to kind of help me with higher level automations. Finding that person and paying them and coming in and doing it is a no-brainer at this point.
yeah. And it really depends. A lot of people listening to this might be thinking, well, I don't have the time to learn that kind of stuff. And that's totally fine. Like, everybody has to be aware of themselves, like have some self-awareness, like of the things that you're good at, the things that you like to do and care about doing. Like, everybody's got a different thing that really revs them up in their firm. For some people, it might be, I just love bringing in the hard cases and working on those and going to trial. And other people might be saying, well, I love the marketing. I love talking to clients and putting ad campaigns together and all that stuff. Or for me, it was always automating and building the systems and how do we make this workflow as painless as possible. So if this kind of stuff isn't your jam, but you recognize the value of it, it definitely pays to bring somebody in to help with that kind of stuff, because it is possible, especially for a lot of these low-hanging fruits like we're talking about today, document automation, which, implementing one of those off-the-rack tools like Gavel or something like that where you just got to load your documents into the system and then you're off to the races. Like, there's so much value there. Even if you're not ready to do it, there are plenty
Yeah.
of people who can help you get your templates geared up. So totally with you there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're getting close to time here for today's episode. Let's get into our tech tip of the week here at Tech Tip of the Episode. I'm going to start out, and it's going to be along the same lines of our theme for today, document automation. And my tech tip is just simply whatever level you're at with automation, no automation at all, some automation, a lot of automation. Take the next steps to kind of figure out where's the next door I can open up when it comes to the level of document automation, especially if you're not doing anything at all. Just go into your CRM. It's not going to cost you any more money, right? Go into your CRM. And if you're not using their button functionality when it comes to their document generation, just start there, right? Upload one document or two documents that are letters or whatever it is. Just start somewhere. And if you're already advanced, take that next step and start exploring that next step, because when it comes to the tech stack or my tech stack, the automation is really the backbone of my entire operation. I mean, it literally produces the most value in the least amount of time and is the most cost effective for running a law firm and profitability, especially in a forms-driven practice of law like probate work. So again, my tip is simply start somewhere, or just, dip your feet in the water and try something new when it comes to document automation and see what you can do. Because once you literally start, you can't stop because it's so amazing.
No, and to piggyback off your point there about starting simple with your existing tools, a lot of these companies, if you send a message to their support people, a lot of them will help you get some of your early template. They may not want to help you do every single document, but they can teach you how the system works, how the syntax works, what you need to do. Some of them actually do have implementation consultants either on staff or in their partnership network that they can put you in touch with that are specific to their platform. And I know this is true of places like Lawmatics and Gabble, where they can put you in touch with people. A quick tip I would give is as kind of also a news flash this week, OpenAI launched their newest model for their large language model, their newest ChatGPT model. It's called GPT-4o Mini. It is basically the miniaturized version of their 4o model, which is their current flagship model. It is extremely cheap. It is 15 cents per million tokens. And like a token, if you think about like in word count, that's like about 500,000 to 600,000 words can be generated for 15 cents. It is now, I think, the cheapest model on the market. But if you look at the benchmarks, it's about as intelligent as their main 4o model. It performs a little worse on some of the main areas. It's still markedly ahead of most other models. And we're talking about literally pennies to generate like entire Encyclopedia Britannica series. It as close to free as
A
you
great
can possibly
series.
get. Right. Yeah. Like it's close to free as you could possibly get. So if you're already implementing these into your Zaps, make sure to go update your model use to the new, cheaper model, because I've done this and it performs exactly the same way for any basic workflows. Even for most things, you could probably start implementing the newer, cheaper model. We'll probably have an episode at some point here talking more about LLMs and the use of AI in law. There's a lot of interesting stuff about that in this document automation context, but alas, we are coming up upon time, and we'll get into that another day. That's my tip of the week. Check your models, update your models, get into AI. It's never been cheaper than it is today.
Awesome. Yeah, great advice, especially everything that's coming out of ChatGPT these days. It's incredible. So, all right. Thanks so much, Dan. It's always a pleasure and talking with you today. And I will see you next week.
John, see you next time.